By the time this video comes out, we're gonna be a few days into August. And as much as I wanted to post this video at the beginning of the month, I just needed a few days to think about how I really felt about the 6 books that I read in July. So let's get into it. Here are the 6 books I read in July. You may be seeing the stack and thinking, Angel, there's only 5 books there. Liar! One of the books I did not finish, and because I had just bought it from Barnes & Noble, I exchanged it for 2 other books. And actually, you know what? Let's start with that book. The book that I did not finish and DNF, but I'm still counting in my stack of books I've read this year because I wasted precious time I could have used reading another book, is Devolution by Max Brooks. I will take accountability in the fact that I walked into that book feeling like I wasn't gonna like it. It is a horror book, which isn't a genre I typically read, but I don't necessarily mind that I don't read a lot of horror. It was about Bigfoot. And I just don't care about anything to do with any ape-like creature. I just don't care. I don't care. And I got 80 pages in and I said, you know what? I don't need to do this to myself. It was for my book club. I didn't end up going to the meeting because I got sick on the Sunday that we had the book club meeting. So I just didn't finish it. And I had my receipt and I went to Barnes & Noble. And I exchanged it for 2 books that I've been meaning to add to my collection, which is Fahrenheit 451 and Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. There is a very specific cover that I was looking for that's paperback that's really pretty. So maybe I'll add a picture of it here. It's just really pretty in my opinion. And I just didn't want to have to read a book that I didn't care about. And you know what? I have free will. I have the choice to not do that to myself. So I decided not to, and I returned it, and I got 2 books that I actually wanted. The second book I finished in July is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors. I feel conflicted about this book because there was a lot about it that I liked, and there was a few things that I disliked that really kind of took a lot of points away for this book for me. Let's start with what I liked. I think that Coco Mellors did a really good job really capturing what sisterhood is like. And I'm saying that as a man, but I grew up with 2 younger sisters, and I feel like my sisters and I would bicker here and there. Like, we would get into little arguments, but I feel like if I took myself out of the equation, just the 2 of them, the fights they would get into, there were like moments where they would just be fighting over the smallest thing, like a t-shirt, and then the next minute they were like best friends, and like that scared me sometimes. That dynamic of sisterhood, I feel like Coco Mellors really captured that in this book. For context, Blue Sisters follows Avery, Bonnie, and Lucky. They're the Blue Sisters a year after the death of their other sister, Nikki, which brings us to the biggest trigger warning for this book. There's a lot of discussion about substance abuse. Nikki passed away because of substance abuse. She overdosed. Each chapter in the book changes perspective. So one chapter we're hearing from Avery, another chapter we're hearing from Bonnie, and then another chapter we're hearing from Lucky. At first, I thought that it was gonna be hard to follow the narrative, but I feel like Mellors does a really good job of like transitioning and keeping everyone's tone and everyone's story going without straying too much away from the entire narrative. Going back to the sisterhood concept in the book, I feel like she did a really good job of making the relationship between the sisters feel genuine, and there was conversations that I feel would actually happen between sisters in the beginning of the book, even though it felt really dense and there was moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this book is getting me in a slump. She really did develop her characters. Even though I was getting in a reading slump, I felt like I still wanted to read the book because I was like, oh my gosh, these characters feel like so real. And then I got to the second half of the book, and that's where it really started to like nosedive for me. And I think it really starts going back to the trigger warning of substance abuse. The way that Mellors handles drug use and having to get help to get through substance abuse really bothered me because of 2 characters. So Avery is the oldest sister. She's a lawyer in London. She lives with her wife, which I'll get back to the fact that she's a lesbian because something else happens in the book that really bothered me. We learned through the exposition that we get in the beginning of the book that Avery has struggled with substance abuse, and she has for years gone to AA meetings and gotten the help she needs, and she's learned how to cope with with addiction. And I thought that the way that Mellors was writing Avery, I was like, oh my gosh, like she's really, you know, being conscientious of how substance abuse affects people, and it didn't feel like rushed or weird. But then after the first half of the book, we see the lead up coming up of Lucky having substance abuse issues as well. The way in which Lucky finds help, and then all of a sudden we're supposed to just believe that after Lucky goes to a couple of AA meetings, she has all of these coping skills, she's like doing way better. Like it just felt so choppy, and it didn't feel like it had the same development that Avery had. So in my head, I was like, this doesn't feel, it feels rushed. It felt rushed, like her journey through getting the help she needed for her substance abuse. Like it didn't feel real. It felt like, it was just like, okay, whatever, like she's getting help. Going back to Avery, another thing that Mellors did that pissed me off, because it's 2025, why do we have to do this? There is an instance where Avery cheats on her wife. She's struggling with addiction, which is real, but then she cheats with a man, and it's just like, what was the point of that?
What was the reason? What was the reason? What was the reason?
It just felt so out of left field. Like Avery just didn't seem like the type of character that would do that. And also like Avery as a character just pissed me off the entire book. She just really pissed me off as a character. She never takes accountability. She gets into this big fight with Lucky and pretty much tells her like, I wish that you had died instead of Nikki. And I was like, damn, like that fight was so crazy. It was so well written. Then they make up and Avery doesn't really take accountability for the fight. It's just like they're sisters again, which again, I think that does happen with sisters and like with siblings in general. Like you might fight with your sibling one day and then the next day you're best friends, but not when they tell you that they wish you had died instead of your other sibling. Also, towards the end of the book, I was like, okay, you know what? I can reckon with the fact that Avery didn't take accountability for being a horrible human being to Lucky, but maybe she'll take accountability with her wife. No accountability. I guess something I also left out for context is that Avery throughout the book is trying to decide whether or not she wants to be a mother. In the end, her rationale for having like stepped out on her wife was pretty much that she just knew she didn't want to be a mother and she should have told her this whole time. Girl, take some accountability. Two other things that really bothered me about the book that I won't get too much into. Number one, I didn't know this until after I read the book and started seeing what other people said about the book, but there's a reference to Israel that's so unnecessary. Like, girl, come on. And number two, there is also the issue of the mother in this book. We do not get a lot of interactions between the mother and the daughters as adults. And the only interaction that we do get is the mother with Avery. And Avery was already pissing me off at this point in the book. Oh, no, I wish you would have had a conversation with Bonnie or with Lucky. It's just, I wanted this book to be so good because I liked how Coco Mellors writes. There was just like a lot of things that didn't really work for me. And is Coco Mellors an exceptional writer? Yes. But there was just like a lot of things that pissed me off about this book. Now that we have the two flops from July, let's talk about the other 4 books I read because I really liked all 4 of these next books. Let's start off with Giovanni's Room. I hadn't read anything by James Baldwin yet, but I just knew that I needed to read his books. I don't know, every time I hear people talk about his writing, it's always top notch. This was the book club pick for a book club that I joined in June, and I didn't finish it, but I told myself I would finish it in July. I'm really glad I did. I ended up liking this book so much, not because of the characters, but because of the writing. This is really, really well written. Obviously, it's James Baldwin. I wasn't expecting anything less. I don't think people would be raving about him as an author all of these years if he wasn't such a good writer. If you haven't read Giovanni's Room, it follows David. He's an American who moves to Paris and he's struggling with his sexuality pretty much. There's a lot of internal dialogue in this book that is kind of reflective of the time that this book takes place in. It takes place in the 1950s. James Baldwin does such a good job of making us feel like we're there with the character as he's like going through life and having to experience being a gay man who's closeted. Like, he's closeted, and I found that there was certain parts in the book where I could feel like David wanted us to believe he was straight, but I was like, girl, nah, you're gay.
You are gay.
You are gay.
You're gay. He's engaged to Hella. Throughout the entire book, he's like, my fiance's gonna come back and then I'm gonna marry her and I gotta be there for my girl, Hella. And then he's like screwing around with Giovanni. There are parts where David is exhibiting very specific types of like internalized homophobia that I think are still present to this day. There are a few scenes in the book where he's in a gay club and a very effeminate queer man will come up to him and he's like, oh, this like queer. And it's like, girl, you're also gay. I had to remind myself multiple times as I was reading this book that it took place in the 1950s, because in my head I was like, damn girl, you're gay. Just admit that you're gay. Oh my gosh. Like, it's 2025 and I was like, wait, no. It's the 1950s in this book. It's not 2025. It was just so well written, and I feel like it also brings in the conversation about how gay men are very misogynistic, and there are conversations about what the dynamic between a man and a woman in a marriage is supposed to be, and David struggling with the fact that he likes men and he doesn't feel like he should, and grappling with the fact that, you know, the man that he's with wants to be with him still, but he ends up realizing, like, do I love this man or am I just infatuated? I think he was in love with him, but like he couldn't grapple with the fact that he was in love with him. When it gets hard in their relationship, because it's an affair pretty much, like he really does get up and leave, and he's like, I don't want this because I don't want the struggle. And then he goes back to Hella and he's like, wait, I don't want this because I don't like her like that.
That means you're gay.
I was scared that it was gonna be very much a like boo-hoo, like, oh my gosh, queer story, that's sad. But in reality, like, it is that, but this was the blueprint. This came out in a time where there wasn't a lot of depictions of homosexual relationships and men loving men narratives. I think everyone should read this, especially if you're gay. Like, I think that some of the conversations that David had around masculinity and his sexuality were really impactful to me, and I was like, oh, like, it's interesting to read a character that was created by this author so long ago have the same dilemmas that I feel people who are in the closet and trying to figure out their sexuality are still having to this day. So 5 out of 5. I didn't think I wasn't gonna like this book. It just was 10 times better than I even thought it was gonna be. For July, the book that was picked for that same book club was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Vuong. This book should come with a trigger warning on the cover. There is substance abuse, there is child abuse, there is domestic violence, there's animal cruelty. I only knew that that was gonna happen because we were reading it as a group. But trigger warnings aside, this book was so real and so just devastating. It was just such a devastating story. Aside from the trigger warnings, I think this is a very well-written book. Before publishing this book, I know that the author has written a lot of poetry, so the prose in this is very dense. Like, I did find myself rereading some portions because I really wanted to understand what he was saying. Before reading the book, I did read some reviews where people were kind of bothered by that it was such a dense and very quote-unquote wordy book. And I think that really bothered me because I don't understand that stance. Like,
are you dumb?
Yeah, books are gonna be wordy sometimes, and sometimes you're gonna have to reread what you're reading to understand it. Like, we already do that with Shakespeare, so why can't we do that with more recent authors? Like, it just, those reviews really bothered me. I don't know why. Like, the entire book is written as a letter from the narrator, Little Dog, to his mother. So Little Dog and his mother and his grandmother lived together in Connecticut, and they came to the United States from Vietnam. There's a lot of instances in this book where the Vietnam War is brought up because Little Dog's grandmother had to pretty much escape the Vietnam War. Like, it was literally at her doorstep. So Little Dog's grandmother and his mother have a lot of PTSD, and that really shows up a lot throughout the book. There's also a conversation in the book about language. Little Dog's mother and his grandmother, they don't speak English as their first language. They speak Vietnamese. Little Dog knows a lot more English than them, but he's literally a child, and we get a lot of instances in the book where he has to help his mother navigate the world. That's a very big responsibility for a little child to take. So we see a lot of instances where the mother's mad at Little Dog for not being able to help. He has to navigate the school system without understanding a lot of English at first, and we also see depictions of racism against him because there are kids in the book that think that it's really funny that he doesn't know English. And then towards the end of the book, we learn that Little Dog is queer. This isn't a memoir, but I did read in some interviews with Ocean and some other reviews that this does pull a lot from his life. So again, not a memoir, but it is things he pulled from his own experience. I think you can really see that with the discussion on class and language, but also the part of having to navigate queerness in the United States, but also in an immigrant household where it's kind of frowned upon. I think a part of this book that really struck me and I was like, damn, I need to pause, this is a lot, was the part where little dog comes out to his mother and the mother's reaction is literally, I had a healthy boy, what happened? Like, I don't know where this is coming from, because I do feel that in the queer experience of coming out, sometimes the narrative parents will take is, I had a healthy child, like, where did I go wrong? And just reading that, and not only the mother delivering that line, but also his reaction, and also the way that Ocean weaved the narrative around the main character and narrator of this book coming out, was very heart-wrenching. And there are other parts in the book that are much more graphic, but to me, that part of the book was just like, damn. The struggle of having to be queer in the United States, especially in the community he grew up with, was already hard. And we see that in the relationship he has with his high school sweetheart. We already see that struggle of having to be queer in a community that isn't really accepting of that, but then having to see him struggle with his mom as well. I felt like it was too much. I had to put the book down. It's a sad book. Even towards the end, like, a lot of sad things just keep happening. And I think there are some books, like, sometimes where people are like, oh, it's just trauma porn. Because I knew walking into this book that he was pulling from his own life and his experience. And as a reader, unless I go, like, read more about it, I don't know where the line blurs between him pulling from his life experience and then the fictional portion of it. I think it didn't read too much as trauma porn. And it was like, oh, he's pulling from his experience and he's pulling from what's going on in his life, and did he maybe embellish some parts and add to it? Yeah, but I don't know what that is. And he was pulling a lot from, like, his experience as an immigrant from another country. It just felt like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, a lot of the trauma that's happening to him is related to that, and like having to navigate the world as an immigrant in the United States. Just think it was really well written. It was just a really sad book. It brought up a lot of conversations that I think are relevant right now, like class, queerness in a society that's like a little bit less accepting than we really think it is, and language. As a child of immigrants, I also had to be the translator in my family. Like, I grew up having to help my mother at the store, like learning how to read legal documents, and that's like an experience that I think isn't talked about enough. Ocean also just came out with another book called The Emperor of Gladness. Before that, I had seen so much about it from some book talk creators and some booktube creators that I like, but now I'm like kind of looking forward to reading it because of this book. Staying on the topic of immigrants and the immigrant experience in the United States, I also read Defectors by Paola Ramos. Paola Ramos is a reporter, and leading up to the 2024 election, she was doing a lot of reporting around the fact that there was a rise in Latino voters who were voting for candidates who were pushing far-right ideologies and were more conservative. I feel like the consensus in a lot of these echo chambers on social media is that it's very weird that Latinos are voting in that way, because a lot of those candidates have ideologies that go very, very specifically against the immigrant experience and immigrants in the United States. In this book, I feel like Paola Ramos interviewed everyone. GOP candidates, she interviewed January 6th rioters, she interviewed border vigilantes who are also Latinos, which was crazy reading it as a Latino myself. I was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? She also interviewed evangelical pastors. There's an entire section in the book where she talks about how there has been this very, very scary shift in the Christian and evangelical church of Latinos and Spanish-speaking churches really shifting into these far-right political spaces. She focuses her entire book around 3 influences she states are what she thinks have been factors that have really moved Latinos who are now voting for these conservative candidates into doing that. She mentions tribalism, and she talks about how there is this yearning from a lot of these Latino voters who are voting for conservative candidates of fitting in. They really want to shift and feel like they are real Americans, right? And so they feel like supporting these candidates really like emboldens them and like makes them real Americans. She also talks about traditionalism. She talks about how there's a lot of conservative religious values that are really rooted in a lot of Latino culture. And she also talks about political trauma that stems from experiences from authoritarianism in Latin America. I feel like the biggest thing I took away from this book was the idea that we really do need to take a moment and listen to each other. I distinctly remember right after the election in 2024, a lot of the exit polls showed that high number of Latinos had voted for Trump, and a lot of people were shocked, but I feel like I had been following Paola Ramos's reporting, so like I wasn't necessarily surprised. Like the number was daunting. I was like, damn. But I just remember that the narrative after that was a lot of people on social media pretty much saying something to the effect of, I hope that Latinos who voted for Trump remember this, like when they're being affected. And it was very much a us versus them type of narrative. Paola really is trying to defy that here and say like, hey, we're not a monolith. Like Latinos are not a monolith just because there are these candidates who are presenting these ideas and these ideologies and creating this policy when they're in office that goes directly against the immigrant and Latino experience. A lot of the times, Latinos are just not a monolith. They're voting for things that are valuable to them. And it is sometimes this like yearning for them to want to fit into the American story, and they want to protect their Americanness. And it was just really insightful. It was really well reported. I was interested walking into this book to see how she navigated this without being biased. There's a very specific part in the book. She's talking to this hair salon owner about COVID, and the lady starts giving Paola false information, and Paola talks about how she knows that she's wrong, and she wants to like immediately be like, no, you're wrong. And she's like, I even got like a little feisty with her, like, no, you're wrong. And coming from a perspective of like, I know this as a reporter, she does not know this. She's going based off of what she has lived and her experience. And I think in the current political climate, we tend to forget that we all have different experiences in life, and we just want everyone to have these same ideologies as us. That really kind of, according to Paola and the way she reported this, like is creating a bigger divide between all of us. All of that is to say, I really enjoyed the book. I think she did a really good job staying as unbiased as possible because again, she's a reporter and she literally had to sit down and talk to January 6th rioters, which, girl, more power to you, because I don't think I could ever do that. This was such a nuanced and empathetic take on the Latino vote that I think I just hadn't seen leading up to the election. I think it was very much everyone thought Latinos were gonna vote how they expect Latinos to vote, and when that didn't happen, people were mad, and it was like, well, we're not a monolith, so we're gonna have to change up the approach. Even if you don't care that much about politics.
Damn, that's crazy.
This is a really interesting read because it's also really well reported, and there's so many historical like points that she hits on that I'm like, damn, this is crazy. And last but not least, I also read What You Are Looking For Is in the Library. This was a very big change in pace compared to everything I read because everything was either sad or really heavy about the world and where we're at right now. So I really loved that the last book I read in July was a lot slower, a lot cozier, a lot cuter. I really enjoyed it. This is a 5 out of 5. This is by Michiko Aoyama. It was translated by Allison Watts, which now that I think about it, I should have probably saved this book for August because August is Women in Translation Month. And if you're looking for a book to read in August for Women in Translation Month, I would recommend this one. I feel like the title kind of gives it away. What You Are Looking For Is in the Library. This book is split into 6 separate stories with 6 different characters, and they all at one point in their small vignettes in this book visit a library, and the librarian helps them figure out their life pretty much. Every single character and their story has a different perspective and different tone, and I also listened to the audiobook of this one as I was working out in the mornings. I really like that in the audiobook, each separate character and each separate story has a different narrator, and they all follow the same kind of structure. So we learn about the character, we learn about what issue in their life they have or like what they're trying to accomplish as a person. Then they discover that they need to go to the library, and it ends up being the same library and the same librarian helping all 6 characters, and she pretty much gives them a list of books, and then one book that's always like out of left field. It isn't a book that they're expecting to read. One of the characters is trying to open his own vintage shop, and the librarian gives him a book about growing plants, and he's like, I don't want to grow plants, and she's like, take it, like, trust me, you'll want to read this. And then she gives him a cute little parting gift. I just really enjoyed the book. It was just really cozy. I think my favorite story was actually the first one. It follows a lady who works at a store. She feels like her life is passing her by, and she goes to the library, and the librarian gives her a childhood book she read in the list of books she's getting because she wants to apply for another job. And she's like, I need to learn how to do Excel, which is so real. Like, that's such a real issue that someone might have nowadays. And the librarian gives her like a list of books for computer class, and she's like, oh, also we have computer classes at the library because what you are looking for is in the library. That was ugly, my bad. She gives her this book from her childhood and she's like, also here's this cute pan that you might use. And she's like, keep it, you should start cooking. And she ends up making a custard that is what the characters in the book that she read as a child made. And I just thought it was really cute. It was just really cute. It was a really cute book. It's really cozy. If you're trying to read a book where people figure their lives out and they feel better about themselves afterwards, and it's just cozy and it's a feel-good book, I recommend this one. It's very good. So yeah, those were the 6 books I read in July. And I guess in that vein, we could also talk about the books I am reading in August. So like I said earlier, August is Women in Translation Month. So 5 of these books are translations. The first one is Tokyo Ueno Station. From what I gathered from the synopsis, is a story of a ghost who is roaming Tokyo Ueno Station. There is a conversation of class and class systems. In the book, I guess the main character was born the same year as a Japanese emperor, and we see how decisions made by this Japanese emperor affected and kind of led to the death of the main character. That's at least what I gathered from the synopsis. My boyfriend already read this and he really, really liked it and he recommended it to me, and it's taken me a year to actually read it. I'm also reading Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This was translated by Jenny Tapley Takemori. Pretty much from the synopsis and other reviews I've seen of this book, it's about a quirky, weird lady who loves working at this convenience store. She loves her life. She thinks everything is great. And society's like, nah girl, you gotta do more with your life. And I've heard that if there's like a twist or like it just gets weird. I'm also trying to read Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro. This book was like in all of the lists that I found when I was trying to see which books I wanted to read that were translations by women. Everyone seems to be reading this. It follows Elena as she goes to Buenos Aires to try to figure out what happened to her daughter who was murdered. I've heard nothing but good things about this book, and apparently it's a movie on Netflix, so I think I might read this and watch the movie after I read it. I also want to read The Vegetarian by Han Kang. She just recently came out with another book, and I think she won the Pulitzer Prize for literature. I've gotten this book recommended to me so many times, and every single person that has recommended it to me has said that this book has stuck with them since they last read it. Apparently, from what I gathered, it's about a woman who decides to go vegetarian and then her life kind of unravels. I'm intrigued. Being a vegetarian can be a very drastic change, so I'm like, maybe it's such a big change that like it screws up her life, so we'll see. I'm also trying to read Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This is also another translation. I wanted to read this last summer and then I never got to it. From what I gathered, it's about this son and this father. I think the mother just recently died, and they're discovering a lot about their family's history, and there's a lot to do with witchcraft and brujeria, and I think some santeria. I was trying to read it for Pride Month last year, so I believe that there are some queer characters. Okay, so those are the translations I'm trying to read. I'm also trying to read a few other books. I need to read Bright Young Women in August because I've been meaning to read this book for the last 2 months now. I didn't read it in June, which is when this book was picked for one of the book clubs that I'm in. I feel like it wasn't my fault that I didn't get to it in July though. I mean, yeah, probably a little bit, but I wasted precious time on Devolution, which I didn't end up reading entirely, so I'm gonna get to this book in August. This follows the Ted Bundy murders, but focuses on the victims rather than Ted Bundy, because we don't need another Ted Bundy book or story or media, anything at this point. I recently got a subscription to Aardvark Book Club, and my pick for July was A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. I didn't get to read this in July because I didn't get it until the first day of August, because I think so many people had ordered this book that Aardvark had to pre-order them, so I finally got my copy. I picked this because it's described as a witchy cozy book, and I don't know, I really liked Gilmore Girls growing up, and Lorelai is an innkeeper, so I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe there'll be some ties into that. Maybe it'll be like more witchy, but we'll find out. Yeah, it just seems really cozy, really nice, and compared to everything else I'm reading, like everything is heavy, I need something cozy, cute, and not so heavy. And then these last 2 books are the picks for both of the book clubs that I'm in. So for one of the book clubs, the pick was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. I think this was picked as the book of the year by Barnes & Noble last year or the year before that. From the synopsis, I gathered that this is about a community who rallies around a deaf black kid as he is navigating the foster care system. I'm reading it for the book club that I just joined back in June, and both of the books that we've read for that book club I've finished, but I haven't finished in time to fully discuss them at the book club meeting. So my goal is to finish this before that book club meeting. And for the second book club, House of Blight by Maxym and Martineau. I already finished this. We had the meeting earlier today, but I didn't finish it in time for the meeting, but I finished it now that the meeting is over. I didn't dislike this book, but it was not what I was expecting. I thought it was gonna be more fantasy, gothic, magical-y, and it was, but it was also very heavy on the smut, and I just don't read a lot of romantasy that is very smut heavy, and maybe it's not for me. I don't know, but mixed emotions with this one, but you know, I finished it. Those were the books I read in July, and also the books I'm trying to read in August. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And let me know in the comments, what did you read in July? What are you reading in August? Are there any books that I read in July that you liked? Or any books that I'm reading in August that you've already read? Let me know what you think about them. Thank you so much. And yeah, till next time.